we have up next, we have Radhika Duggal. And if you've been on any recent webinars, she might be familiar because a few months ago, she published a textbook, authored a textbook through Stukent on consumer behavior. And we had a nice turnout for that webinar presentation. And so this is her second time joining us, and we're excited to have Radhika. And if we can get, let me reset this. If we can get the Stukent team to put the link to the consumer behavior textbook, just in case anyone's interested in learning more about her work, they can easily do that. So Radhika, I'm going to just go over your, I'm going to briefly introduce you. If I miss anything, feel free to help me out there. But Radhika draws on her experience working in highly regulated industries like financial services and healthcare to lead the design of innovative brand strategies to drive awareness and consideration for brands through multi-channel marketing campaigns. Right now, Radhika is currently the head of student marketing at Chase. Radhika earned an MBA in marketing from the Columbia Business School and a BA in marketing and international business from the Leonard N. Stern School of Business at New York University. She also teaches consumer behavior at the Leonard N. Stern School of Business in NYU. And so we're excited to have Radhika. If that link didn't get up, we'll get it up there. No worries, not a big deal. But we're excited to learn about voice search. And Radhika is going to talk to us about how voice search integrates into consumer behavior and our interactions with audiences and users and customer bases. So Radhika, we're going no slide today, but you did promise you're going to be extremely engaging. We did get that.
Really animated, more animated than slides would be. And, part of the reason we're going no slides is because I think sometimes we, as educators and as humans, we tend to read the slide as opposed to listen to kind of the facts that are being stated. And this kind of next 15 or 20 minutes is going to be chock full of really important data and information and how we can share that data and information with our students, because as educators, that's what's important to us. So I'm going to take a step back and just first thank you guys so much for having me. As the folks at Stukent know, I have a full-time marketing job. I work at JP Morgan Chase currently, but teaching and education and the work I have been so lucky to do with Stukent is truly my passion. And so every 30-minute break where I get to do something like this truly makes my day. So thank you for having me. Secondly, I know that was a wonderful introduction, so I'm not going to spend too much time belaboring my background. But what I will say is that one of the really important things as a marketer that we have to keep up with that really helps me to, I hope, be something resembling a great professor is just ongoing trends in the marketplace. And we all know with social media, with digital marketing, with everything going on today in the field is continually changing. And one of those newest changes that I truly believe is going to have a significant impact on consumer behavior, one of those changes is voice. And that's why I'm so excited at the prospect of talking to you guys a bit about voice, but also making sure that we are all on the same page as educators about, hey, when new trends happen in the market, how do we teach our students about that? How do we make sure that they are prepared with an understanding of those new trends as they go out into the marketplace and search for jobs? My goal in my classroom is to talk about the trends that can prepare them for that job interview in many ways. And this is one that is front and center for me right now. So first, let's talk a little bit about what is voice? What are we talking about? And why are we talking about it? So voice is something that's having a huge impact on consumer behavior. It's something that marketers are scrambling to adapt, and I can raise my hand and say I am one of them. And we also are going to cover how do we then teach our students about that. So we'll start with what is voice. Voice is really, it's a software application, and it enables consumers to interact with the internet as an alternative to a keyboard or a mouse or our phones. And just like you search by typing something, you can search with using your voice now. And there are a couple of real advantages for voice if you are a consumer or if you're a company. From the consumer's perspective, it's convenient, right? We've all used Siri on our iPhones. Many of us probably have Alexa or Google Home in our homes, and we get used to that very quickly. It's just a point of convenience for the customer. But for a business, it's so critical because it's yet another touch point or another way we can make inroads into being a partner into a consumer's life. And, it's something that when we think voice, it's gotten a lot of attention recently because of Google Home and because of Alexa, but think voice more broadly, right? Think about how 81% of folks, they use the Siri feature or the voice feature on their smartphone. Think about the in-home speakers. Think about screen-based devices and other devices. And when we think about voice, we also have to think about, well, what is it used for? People are using voice to search for anything and everything. They're looking for general information like the weather. They're looking to tell Amazon Alexa or Google Home to play their favorite song. Or in a lot of cases, they're looking to make purchases using voice. And all that data goes to show that voice is something that's proliferating our society and our culture. And it's creating this unprecedented behavior shift. It's changing the way we as consumers, we interact with technology and with brands and quite frankly, sometimes with each other. And as a business, that means it'll impact how do we search for information? How do we search for products? How do we search for brands? And how do we interact with those products or brands or pieces of information? And it may be that it's even more impactful than other types of platforms because of the rate of adoption. So voice tech has actually reached mass adoption much more quickly than some of the other game-changing pieces of technology that are out there in the market. So within 3 years of introduction to the market, about 50% of US households adopted voice. Now contrast that with a smartphone, right? Think about our iPhone or our Samsung or Android phone. That took about 5 years to get to 50% adoption. The television, going back a couple of years, the television actually took 9 years to gain mass adoption. So voice is a thing and it's not going away. And surveys show that, consumers want to buy and use voice devices. If you think specifically about that voice, that smart speaker in your home, today, 24% of households own a smart speaker device. And actually, I lied. That was as of a year ago. 62% of those that own the smart speaker first started using the device within the last 6 months. 40% of smart speaker owners own more than one device in their home. And by the way, I'm happy to raise my hand and say I live in 600 square feet, and I think we have, 4 of these in our home. 600 square feet, and we have 4 Google Home devices in our home. And I am not alone, at least from the folks that I talk to. And 45% of folks, we're all continuing to plan to buy more. And brands are really diving right in, right? They know customers have these devices and use these devices. So brands are absolutely diving right in. So with Amex, for example, you can ask Alexa about Amex offers. Capital One enables you to ask Alexa about your account balance. Starbucks enables you to tell Alexa to start making your drink so that you can just pop by your local Starbucks and your drink is ready. And Yahoo enables you to ask Alexa about your fantasy football lineup. These are just a couple of examples, but so far, businesses are diving right in, and so are universities, which is interesting for us as educators. So St. Louis University, for example, was the first to implement Alexa for Business across their campus. So great. Lots of businesses are using it. Lots of consumers have these devices in their homes, and they're addicted to Siri on their smartphone. But what does that all mean for consumer behavior? Well, if we thought that the internet shook up consumer behavior, we were right, but voice is really, really the next big thing. And if we think about how or why, there are a couple of things to focus on that really demonstrate how consumer behavior could truly change. Think about shopping, right? This is the obvious shift. We are using voice devices more and more to ask Alexa to make purchases for us, for example. So Alexa, buy Tide, Alexa, buy toilet paper. Think about learning, right? You can learn anything online. And think about, cooking, right? You can see a recipe, learn how to make something while you are doing it with Alexa giving you directions. Think about teaching your kids. I focus on student marketing here at Chase. And think about the endless possibilities for teaching your children using a voice device. You can better understand your fitness level, right? Because these voice devices can integrate into your Fitbit or Apple Watch. You can control your home, right? We as consumers are so used to now being able to verbalize commands, lock the door, turn on this appliance, control the temperature. The applications are absolutely endless. And this is going to change how our new generation of consumers think and feel. So even if you didn't have one of these devices as a child in your home, they are incredibly easy to get used to. Very small, very silly personal example. We have these 4 Google Chrome devices in our very little home. And what I've learned is I travel for work. And, I find myself checking into the hotel and saying, hey, Google, turn on all lights. Well, I'm not home. The Hilton that I stay at in Columbus, Ohio doesn't have a Google Chrome, but just automatically I expect that it is there. And that is me, someone who hasn't grown up with this in their lives since birth. Imagine our students who entered a world where they always had a smartphone that always had voice capability. For them, this is going to feel like second nature. So as marketers, that means as we think about, especially folks in my role where we think about targeting Gen Z and millennials, that means we are scrambling to find efficient and effective ways to act on this opportunity with voice, to build new and robust experiences and customer journeys. But it's not always easy. As responsible marketers, we know that there's just a ton of time, energy, and effort put into parsing out what is efficient marketing spend and what is not. And digital actually enables us to do that because we can get real-time feedback with what's driving volume and what is not. And that makes things difficult. Now, if you're in a retail business, you can absolutely see that very quickly. You can see how many people are saying, Alexa, buy Tide, or whatever. So those voice commands or those voice skills, you can track profitability very quickly. But I spent most of my career in financial services and healthcare, 2 areas where, well, you can't really create a voice skill to get someone to open a bank account yet. You can't really create a voice skill to prescribe someone medication yet. And so while we in these fields know voice is really important, we struggle with the challenge of how do we build something that serves our consumers in the voice space, because we know that's what they expect, but how do we do it in a way that is profitable, that enables us to drive volume, that enables us to be helpful to consumers? Well, there's a couple things we need to think about, whether we're in these highly regulated industries like financial services or healthcare, or we're in a consumer products industry and we're able to drive volume based on voice. We have to think about, what is the strategic approach? What is our company's strategic approach to voice? What is the goal? Is it, I work for P&G, is it to drive volume? Is it I work at Chase and it could be to drive financial wellness? What are our goals? So first, we need to have a strategic approach. Second, we need to have a sense of what is our sound identity. Just like we as marketers spend a ton of time, energy, and effort building real cohesive brand identities, now a very important part of that is becoming your sound identity. What does the voice sound like, right? What tone are you using, etc. And then how do we execute on it, right? What are we doing with voice? What are the channels? And what are the goals? So that's all great. And we are able then to build out and execute those strategies. But we might ask ourselves, well, great, with any new channel, what are the considerations? And there are 3, at least that in my day job, I think through pretty deeply. The first is really driving traffic to a website and SEO, right? One of the simplest ways for a consumer to get to our websites is through SEO. So for example, they search for something, they type it into Google, and they wind up getting a list of recommendations on the SERP, and they click on the right one for them. Well, with voice, that infrastructure doesn't exist yet. And what does exist is certainly not sophisticated enough. Algorithms for SEO are built on written text searches. And relevance, as we measure relevance, it's really based on written text searches. But the way people search with voice is different than the way they search when they actually write or type something out. So for example, you might search with voice how you speak, and it'll likely be a longer, fuller phrase or fuller sentence versus when you type something into the Google search engine, you type in a much more pithy way. So that's one thing. How do we optimize SEO and search for voice? A second thing, a challenge to think about and to try to overcome is marketing products using purely verbal descriptions. Now, we all know as marketers and professors that visual descriptions, that images really help to improve recognition and recall for brands. But voice doesn't allow for that. So how do we come up with short, catchy, precise product descriptions that remain in our customers' minds and that differentiate us from the competitors? If we thought being concise in email was hard, think about being concise in voice, even harder. And the third thing to think about is consumers need to feel secure when they're putting financial information into kind of a voice-activated search function. Anyone nearby, in theory, if your home device has your credit card information, anyone within earshot could make a voice request and could purchase something. So there needs to be some thought put into PIN numbers or a unique voice print or something to make sure that consumers don't run the risk that anyone within earshot is able to take advantage of them and purchase something with their credit card once voice is activated. So I've spoken a lot about trends in the industry, have spoken a lot about key challenges marketers will face and how marketers are, in a lot of cases, scrambling to get skills on Alexa, et cetera, built in order to address this trend. But what does this mean for us as educators? I think that's something to be really mindful of. And I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that one of my goals as an educator is to make sure that we are preparing our students to go out into those job interviews and have real relevant things to say. And as someone who hires folks on a daily basis, one of the things I get really excited about is when a student comes into an interview and has a perspective on something that's real, that's current, and that I'm thinking about. And voice is one of those things. So how do we integrate this into some of the lessons that we're teaching in our classrooms today? Well, I think first and foremost, we start by leading with the facts. We talk about the proliferation and the demand for voice. We talk about how voice is impacting the offerings that businesses commercialize. And we talk about how that in turn impacts consumer behavior. And we can also have our students put real time, energy, and effort in a project-based way on how they, if they were in the shoes of marketers working at various types of companies, would develop an approach to voice. And we can do that by thinking about a couple of different steps that could be a piece of a project that they perform. First, we could challenge students to get together in groups and define the strategy for a specific company or a specific product's voice strategy. And what are the overall objectives? How do those objectives differ by voice channel, right? Smartphone versus in-home device versus something else. That's thing one. What is the strategy? Thing two could then be, well, we talked about brand identity and how sound identity is an incredibly critical new piece of brand identity. So what should the company's sound identity be? What does the voice sound like and why? What should the tone sound like and why? The third piece is a pilot. Every responsible company is going to try to pilot on a smaller scale. So what could a pilot for rolling out voice for chosen company, chosen product look like? What channels will be used? What will it drive? What will be the CTA for the consumer? What will the creative sound like? And the last piece is the impact. What impact do they hope to drive on consumer behavior? What behavior will shift? Will they drive volume? Will they drive financial health? Will they drive something else? And as you're thinking about having your students go through an exercise like this could be something as small as a one class session project that they tackle together in the classroom, or it could be something much greater like your final project. But one thing I would really be cognizant of, and that I've tested out in my classroom and learned the hard way, when kind of left to their own devices, all students are going to pick to do this project with a retailer, right? Because that's the most obvious application if you're a student. You think about, oh, well, I'm Amazon and I'm selling Tide, or I'm Kellogg's and I'm selling cereal. If you challenge one group of students to think in that way, but challenge another group to be a financial services company, challenge another group of students to be a pharma company, right? To think about how voice can make an impact on businesses outside of just simple e-commerce. That's where the gold really happens, right? That's when they start thinking about what are the consumer's unmet needs when it comes to something that isn't just buying Tide or buying cereal. And you'll see some really creative examples, as I've seen from my students, as they think through how to attack these challenges and use this channel for something other than a simple consumer product. So I'm going to stop for just a moment. And before I kind of wrap up, and I'm happy to take any questions, but before I do that, I just want to talk through the fact that it's very clear to me as both a marketer and an educator that voice is becoming a real thing. It's something that we as marketers are scrambling to accommodate, but it's also something that could impact our students, not only because it impacts them in their everyday life, but really truly because it could be the next field that they work in, whether they work in an agency or they work in a company role as a marketer, or they work at a consulting firm trying to help companies figure out what to do with voice. And because of that, I get really excited about the opportunity to teach them just a little bit about that, to prepare them for that next phase in their life where they get to work in this field. So I'm going to stop. Happy to take any questions or make any clarifications that could be helpful.
All right. Radhika, thank you. So we have some questions that have come in. One thing is maybe clarify a little bit what your role is with students at Chase Bank, and then maybe that the direction of that question will go to what are the common things you see students claiming knowledge, skills that they get from university, and where you're just like, that is not relevant right now. So that makes sense.
The first part of the question, which is what is my role, makes absolute sense. I didn't fully understand the second part. So why don't I answer the first part and then we'll go to the second.
Perfect.
Excellent. So my role at Chase is to quote unquote run marketing to students. And what does that mean? It means two things in my mind. Number one, responsibility over kind of the P&L and the marketing-driven volume for a number of our student products. So everything from a high school checking account to a college checking account to savings accounts, et cetera, and any other product that sort of touches students. But the second piece, and the piece that I get most excited about, is the opportunity to help Chase build itself as the go-to source for financial wellness for students. And that is something we as a bank are committed to and something that my team is responsible for. So how do you help students and their parents build financial literacy and make smart money decisions so that they can build that solid financial foundation and be successful, quite frankly, well into their futures? And then I didn't really understand the second question. Let's try again.
Yeah. The second question was, if you have experience working with young adults, newly graduated students, interns, is there a common thing you see when they're interviewing or coming onto the job, a trait or a skill or knowledge that they all come in with that is not relevant?
Yeah. This is
like we're doing it wrong at the university level.
Well, one thing I would say is anyone who's an educator is truly very often doing the absolute best they can with very, very limited resources sometimes. So kudos to everyone on the line who's likely taking time out of their day to learn on the side so that they can better serve their students. So I want to start with that. The one thing I would say, and something I try to really combat in one of my classes, I currently teach a startup marketing class, which I know is ironic considering where I work. But I spent 3 years working at a company called Common Bond, which was a student lender and very truly a startup. And it's so interesting. We have these conversations in my classroom about how in school, as college students, folks tend to learn a lot of strategy. They do a lot of thinking. Even our final projects, we make PowerPoint decks about what we will do. We never get to actually do the work. So, for example, in my startup marketing class, not only do we say, hey, here's the marketing strategy for we're focused on a Pilates studio that's down the street from where I live. And we're put together her marketing strategy for her studio, but the kids actually do the work. They write the content, meaning that they create the blog posts, they create the videos for YouTube, they create the social posts, etc. They do the work so that when they come into a work environment, look, like as much as we all would love that to be doing marketing strategy all the time, I run marketing to a segment and I do marketing strategy like 20% of the time, right? So much of marketing is about bringing that strategy to life. And that's what makes you successful. I would absolutely love to see more of my interns as well as sort of entry-level folks on my team be more well-versed in actually doing work. And actually, that's why I love the student digital marketing textbook, because they actually get to do work in it, right? The simulations that Student puts forth actually enables students to get their hands dirty, try different things. That is what prepares you, in my opinion, for kind of the real world.
Great. That answered that question perfectly. Thank you, Radhika.
Of course.
So we have a handful of questions, and let's see if we can get through those. So could you go over the key bullet points for educators again from your presentation? Valerie says, I got a lead with facts. What is the sound identity and desired impact? But I missed a few others. So maybe just retouching that.
Absolutely. So when I think about teaching about voice to my class, here's kind of the outline of what I would do. I'd lead with the facts, right? Thinking about the proliferation of voice and the demand for it. How is it impacting the offering that businesses commercialize? So what that means is, how does that impact how marketers actually market their products? And in turn, how does that impact consumer behavior? Remember, because my Google Chrome lets me start my Starbucks drink through voice, that impacts how I as a consumer behave. Now I don't go to the Starbucks and order. I tell Google Chrome to get my drink started. I hop into the elevator. I live a block away from a Starbucks. It's done, right? So it has changed my consumer behavior. And so we want to challenge our students to think about those three things: the proliferation and demand for voice, how it's impacting what businesses or marketers do, and then how that in turn changes consumer behavior. And then if we think about a project, I would have students do a couple of things. Choose a product or a company and think through these things. Number one, what is the strategy, right? What are the overall goals for voice? Number two, what is the brand identity? So what is that sound identity, right? How does sound suddenly fit into building a brand identity? Number three, how would you pilot something, right? For any company, large or small, it's really difficult to just jump into a mass market strategy. So how would you pilot something? What would the impact then be on consumer behavior? One of the courses that I teach frequently is consumer behavior. So always thinking of that as the basis of marketing, and how would a pilot or a full-scale launch impact consumer behavior?
Great. Thank you for that explanation and retouching on that. Appreciate it. What about products or tools? Are there any that stick out? Maybe some that you reference in class, at Chase? Like what's out there? Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah. So one of the things I actually want to start doing, and I haven't done this yet, is bring in an Amazon Alexa or a Google Chrome and start to let the students play while they're in class with it. And what I think could happen is we'll start to see how students naturally interact with it. Now, I think those in-home devices are particularly interesting because you get to see in a public place, right? In a classroom full of students, a student says one thing, right? Turn on the lights. You actually get to see it come to life. You try to buy something, right? Assuming it's hooked up to your Amazon account. And you get to see like, hey, I said something will arrive. So I think that there's real value. Again, the difference between like theory and talking about stuff and doing stuff and seeing it happen. It's a lesson for me as well. And so I think bringing that into the classroom is also really, really valuable. On a smaller scale, if you don't have, 4 of them in your apartment like I do, could just be having students run regular searches with Siri on their iPhone, right? A number of your students probably have an iPhone, and challenge students to think about, hey, if I'm a marketer for company X, let's make it up. We're saying we sell Kashi cereal, right? What are the different types of voice commands you'd want to make sure that your iPhone is able to kind of respond to? Something might be e-commerce related, something might be cooking or recipe related, right? Or something might be simply about like nutritional information or allergen information. So I think having the students actually do something with a device will help them really learn how marketers then need to think. Because marketers start and back, right? As a marketer, we think about consumer behavior and we try to make sure that we are creating products and services that help drive consumer behavior forward in a positive way.
So as you were talking, a light bulb went off in my head. I thought it would be super cool as an in-class project is, like you mentioned, bringing in an Alexa or a Google Home product and having one group pull up the voice search for a certain query, and then have another group pull up like a web browser search, ask the same question, and see how the results vary, and then see why certain results are ranking higher for a voice search compared to just a normal web application based search. Lots of cool things you can do with that. At Chase, is Chase doing anything as along those lines, like proactively or?
So unfortunately,
voice.
One of the ways I get permission to do speaking engagements that don't have anything to do with Chase is to not speak about work at Chase. So I can't actually answer that one.
Understandable. Okay, no worries. We'll go on to some other questions. So about the class you teach, so a question came in that was asked, do you use your text in a consumer behavior class, or is it a different like elective class that you use it in?
Yeah, so well, the book launched in December of this past year, and I actually taught consumer behavior last semester, typically teach it every other semester. So this semester I'm teaching startup marketing. So it's not apples to apples applicable. The next time I do teach consumer behavior, I absolutely would use that text because, I mean, if I don't do it, who else can I expect to do it? But the text was written very much for a consumer behavior class.
Great. Cool. Here's kind of an interesting thought and question. I don't know if we can, maybe you can answer this here, Radhika, but a great concern, valid concern from Laura, is one of the concerns I have is the security of using Alexa or Google Voice and the use of student voices. There are many unknowns in terms of security and how our voices and images can be recorded and used. And what is the liability to schools? What are the security implications for the consumer? I don't have a response to that. Maybe you do. I'm assuming it's the concerns of many folks out there. Not as a concern for me personally as a consumer, but at an education institution, it might be.
Yeah, and I don't have any educated answer. I can just share my opinion and would caveat all over that it is my opinion. I think this just goes back to the general debate we have about privacy, right? At the end of the day, we share so much data with so many companies out there. And I think what will happen with voice is exactly the same thing that happens with other forms of technology. Consumers that are concerned about privacy tend to opt out, right? They tend to use ad blockers. They tend to not use, I'm making this up, not share information on social media, etc. And I do think in the future, voice will be just one of those things. If you are a consumer who feels very protective of their privacy, you probably won't do things like share your credit card information with your Google Home. You just might shy away from that. Mm-hmm. But again, just my opinion.
Yeah, great. Well, we're going to let you off. Radhika, I believe you need to be to another engagement in 3 minutes.
2:00, next meeting.
Yeah, next meeting. So we appreciate you carving out some time to talk to us about voice search, the trend behind that, how we can incorporate that into the classroom and get students actively knowing more about it and engaging in things that they can take to the workplace after university or school. So Radhika, thank you. And
thank you so much for having me.
Yep, and we'll talk to you later.
Bye.